So as part of our effort at First School to keep teaching you, despite the situation, a group of us are going to, over the next few days, read books to you. These videos of us reading books will be posted online and you can listen to them if you want to listen to them whenever you want. I was trying to think about what book to read to you guys, and when I was at school, one of my favourite authors was a man called Terry Pratchett, and this book, Truckers, I've never read before. So I thought I'd take this opportunity to read this and read it out loud in a few chunks on the internet, and you can listen to it or not listen to it. This is Truckers by Terry Pratchett. Concerning gnomes and time. Gnomes are small. On the whole, small creatures don't live for a long time, but perhaps they do live fast. Let me explain. One of the shortest lived creatures on the planet Earth is the adult common mayfly. It lasts for 1 day. The longest living things are bristlecone pine trees at 4,700 years old and still counting. Now this may seem tough on mayflies, but the important thing is not how long your life is, but how long it seems. To a mayfly, a single hour may last as long as a century. Perhaps old mayflies sit around complaining about how life this minute isn't a patch on the good old minutes of long ago when the world was young and the sun seemed so much brighter and larvae showed you a bit of respect. Whereas the trees, which are not famous for their quick reactions, may just have time to notice the way the sky keeps flickering before the dry rot and the wormwood sets in. It's all a sort of relativity. The faster you live, the more time stretches out. And to a gnome, a year lasts as long as 10 years does to a human. Remember this. Don't let it concern you. They're not concerned. They don't even know. From the Book of Gnome, Basements, verses 1 to 12. In the beginning, there was the site. And Arnold Brothers, established 1905, moved upon the face of the site and saw that it had potential. For it was in the High Street. Yea, it was also handy for the buses, and Arnold Brothers, established 1905, said, let there be a store, and let it be a store such as the world has not seen hitherto. Let the length of it be from Palmer Street even unto the fish market, and the width of it from the High Street right back unto Disraeli Road. Let it be high, even unto 5 stories plus basement, and bright with lifts. Let there be the eternal fires of the boiler room in the sub-basement, and above all other floors let there be customer accounts to order all things. For this must be what all shall know of Arnold Brothers, established 1905. All things under one roof, and that shall be called the store of Arnold Brothers, established 1905. And thus it was. And Arnold Brothers, established 1905, divided the store into departments of ironmongery, corsetry, modes, and others after their kind, and created humans to fill them with all things, saying, yea, all things are here. And Arnold Brothers, established 1905, said, let there be lorries, and let their colours be red and gold, and let them go forth, so that all may know Arnold Brothers, established 1905, by appointment delivers all things. Let there be Santa's grottos, and winter sales, and summer bargains, and back to school week, and all commodities in their season. And into the store came the gnomes, and it should be their place for ever and ever. Chapter 1. This is the story of the going home. This is the story of the critical path. This is the story of the lorry, roaring through the sleeping city and out into the country lanes, smashing through street lamps and swinging from side to side, shattering shop windows and rolling to a halt when the police chased it. And when the baffled men went back to their car to report, listen, will you, listen, there isn't anyone driving it, it became the story of the lorry that started up again, rolled away from the astonished men and vanished into the night. But the story didn't end there. It didn't even start there either. The sky rained dismal. It rained humdrum. It rained the kind of rain that is so much wetter than normal rain, the kind of rain that comes down in big drops and splats, the kind of rain that is merely an upright sea with slots in it. It rained a tattoo on the old hamburger boxes and chip papers in the wire basket that was giving Masklin a temporary hiding place. Look at him. Wet, cold, extremely worried, and 4 inches high. The waste bin was usually a good hunting ground even in winter. There were often a few cold chips in their wrapping, sometimes even a chicken bone. Once or twice there had been a rat too. It had been a really good day when there had last been a rat. It had kept them going for a week. The trouble was that you could get pretty fed up with rats by the third day. By the third mouthful, come to that. Masculine scanned the lorry park. And here it came, right on time, crashing through the puddles and pulling up with a hiss of brakes. He'd watched this lorry arrive every Tuesday and Thursday morning for the last 4 weeks. He timed the driver's stop carefully. They had exactly 3 minutes. To someone the size of a gnome, that's more than half an hour. He scrambled down through the greasy paper, dropped out of the bottom of the bin, and ran for the bushes at the edge of the park where Grimmer and the old folk were waiting. "It's here," he said. "Come on." They got to their feet, groaning and grumbling. He'd taken them through this dozens of times. He knew it wasn't any good shouting. They just got upset and confused. And then they grumbled some more. They grumbled about cold chips, even when Grimmer warmed them up. They moaned about rats. He'd seriously thought about leaving alone, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. They needed him. They needed someone to grumble at. But they were too slow. He felt like bursting into tears. He turned to Grimmer instead. "Come on," he said. "Give them a prod or something. They'll never get moving." She patted his hand. "They're frightened," she said. "You go on, I'll bring them out." There wasn't time to argue. Masculine ran back across the soaking mud of the park, unslinging the rope and grapnel. It had taken him a week to make the hook out of a bit of wire teased off a fence, and he'd spent days practicing. He was already swinging it round his head as he reached the lorry's wheel. The hook caught the tarpaulin high above him at the second try. He tested it once or twice, and then, his feet scrabbling for a grip on the tyre, pulled himself up. He'd done it before. Oh, he'd done it 3 or 4 times. He'd scrambled under the heavy tarpaulin and into the darkness beyond, pulling out more line and tying it as tightly as possible round one of the ropes that was as thick as his arm. Then he slid back to the edge, and thank goodness Grimmer was holding the old people across the gravel. He could hear them complaining about the puddles. Masculine jumped up and down with impatience. It seemed to take hours. He'd explained to them millions of times, but people hadn't been pulled up onto the back of lorries when they were children, and they didn't see why they should start now. Old Granny Morky insisted that all the men look all the other way so they wouldn't see up her skirt, for example. And old Torrit whimpered so much that Masculine had to lower him again so that Grimmer could blindfold him. It wasn't so bad after he'd hauled the first few up, because they were able to help on the rope, but time still stretched out. He pulled Grimmer up last. She was light. They were all light, if it came to that. You didn't get rat every day. It was amazing. They were all on board. He'd worked with an ear cocked for the sound of footsteps on the gravel and the slamming of a driver's door, but it hadn't happened. "Right," he said, shaking with the effort. "That's it. Now, we just go." "I dropped the thing," said old Torrit. "The thing, I dropped it, you see. I dropped it down the wheel when she was blindfolding me. You go get it, boy." Masculine looked at him in horror. Then he poked his head out from under the tarpaulin, and yes, there it was, far below, a tiny black cube on the ground. The thing. It was lying in a puddle, although that wouldn't affect it. Nothing touched the thing, it wouldn't even burn. And then he heard the sound of slow footsteps on the gravel. "There's no time," he whispered. "There really is no time." "Well, we can't go on without it," said Grimmer. "Of course we can. It's just a thing. We won't need the wretched object where we're going." He felt guilty as soon as he'd said it, amazed at his own lips for uttering such words. Grimmer looked horrified. Granny Morky drew herself up to her full, quivering height. "May you be forgiven!" she barked. "What a terrible thing to say! You tell him, Torrit!" She nudged Torrit in the ribs. "If we ain't taking the thing, I ain't going," said Torrit sulkily. "It's not—" "That's your leader you're talking to," interrupted Granny Morky. "So you do what you told. Leave it behind, indeed. It wouldn't be decent. It wouldn't be right. So you go and get it, this minute." Masculine stared wordlessly down at the soaking mud, and then, with a desperate motion, threw the line over the edge and slid down it. It was raining harder now, with a touch of sleet. The wind whipped at him as he dropped past the great arc of the wheel and landed heavily in the puddle. He reached out and scooped up the thing, and the lorry started to move. First there was a roar, so loud that it went beyond sound and became a solid wall of noise. Then there was a blast of stinking air and a vibration that shook the ground. He pulled sharply on the line and yelled at them to pull him up, but realised that even he couldn't hear his own voice. But Grimmer, or someone, must have got the idea, because just as the big wheel began to turn, the rope tightened and he felt his feet lifted up off the mud. He bounced and spun back and forth as with painful slowness they pulled him back past the wheel. It turned only a few inches away from him, a black, chilly blur, and all the time the hammering sound of it battered at his head. "I'm not scared," he told himself. "There's much worse than anything I've ever faced, but it's not frightening. It's too terrible to be frightening." He felt as though he was in a tiny, warm cocoon, away from all the noise and the wind. "Oh, I'm going to die," he thought, "just because of this thing which has never helped us at all, something that's just a lump of stuff, and now I'm going to die and go to heaven. Well, I wonder if old Torret's right about what happens when you die. It seems a bit severe to have to die to find out. I've looked at the sky every night for years and I've never seen any gnomes up there." But it didn't really matter. It was all outside him. It wasn't real. Hands reached down and caught him under the arms and dragged him into the booming space under the tarpaulin, and with some difficulty prized the thing out of his grip. Behind the speeding lorry, fresh curtains of grey rain dragged across the empty fields, and across the whole country there were no more gnomes.